Ring, ring. Hello? Is this Yayoi?
Moshi moshi, Yayoi desu.
Moshi moshi. Hello, it's Robert calling from the East Coast. Are you in Honolulu, Hawaii today?
Hi, so desu. Roboto-san, genki desu ka?
Hi, Genki desu. So, Yayoi, you're working on a new film project, War Brides of Japan. What is the project about?
Well, it's a documentary film. It's called War Brides of Japan, and it is a documentary, a feature-length documentary. It's a historical film where we are interviewing war brides, the children of war brides, and or the grandchildren of war brides, specifically from Japan. So for those who are not familiar, post-World War II, Japan, the U.S. military occupied it, as they still do today. But at that time, it was right after the war, and the U.S. military became the largest employer in Japan. At the time, at the end of the war, there were over 2 million Japanese men who had perished. Therefore, it was contingent on the women to become the breadwinners for their families, and they were able to get jobs with the U.S. military, which put them into contact with American GIs, and that's how they began to meet them, socialize with them, and eventually war brides married these American military men.
Wow, Yayoi, that's very interesting. Why is it important for you to make this film?
Well, it's important because my own mother was a Japanese war bride, and she was a very creative, she had a lot of personality. And I was actually approached by a filmmaker while I was still living in Seattle, some 16 years ago now, who had the idea of making a documentary about her. Somehow that didn't work out, and over the years there were other filmmakers I wanted to work with, and it just didn't work out. And then about 4 years ago, I thought, well, maybe this needs to be a film about other Japanese war brides as well. I wanted to know if they shared similar experiences. I heard my mother's stories all my life from the time we could understand, communicate with her, my sister and myself. She would tell us what it was like living through the war. Japan was heavily bombed, particularly Tokyo, where she lived. What it was like having to run to bomb shelters when the siren went off. The aftermath of the bombing, when you come out of the shelters and you're seeing bodies in the streets. Even after when the war was finished, there was no infrastructure. Transportation was mangled. Utilities, food was scarce. There was rationing. So it was a really hard time for Japanese civilians who really didn't have that much to do with the war. They were not fighting. They were trying to escape it. So we heard her stories about that, how she met my father, who was an American soldier stationed in Japan. And after marrying him and coming to the United States, where her life actually got worse for a while. So all of those things were captivated my imagination and got my attention that this is something very important because she wasn't the only one. There were actually some almost 50,000 Japanese war brides that eventually settled in the United States. So my curiosity was, did all these women share similar experiences? I felt like they had to happen, and that's why I wanted to pursue this project.
At what stage are you now in the production of the project?
Well, we just started filming in September. As I said, I started about 4 years ago, and with the documentary, it's really hard to script it because you have no idea who you're even going to be interviewing for it. So over the years, I collected a few people who were either war brides or the children of war brides, and sometimes the grandchildren of war brides that wanted to be involved. And along the way, I lost quite a few of them because there were all these delays. So as you probably know, in independent filmmaking, the number one issue is always, where's the money going to come from? And so that was always something that was elusive to the project, and it delayed it for quite a while. But this summer, I was able to raise money through our very generous donors that we appreciate so much, and acquired a fiscal sponsor to help us with that. And with that money, we had enough for travel expenses to travel through 3 states and interview individually 33 different people. At this stage, we are in post-production, and I am editing all the footage, creating a couple of trailers because now we need post-production funds, and hopefully we'll be done by the beginning of the year.
How can this audience help get the film onto the screen?
Well, Well, the biggest way the audience can support this is financially through donation. And we do, like I said, we have a fiscal sponsor and we have an ongoing donation page. Their donation is 100% tax deductible. They can actually go to our website, which is warbridesofjapan.com. It's all written together, warbridesofjapan.com, and there is a button to donate, and that button will take you, when you click on that button, it will take you to the Network for Good donation page that we have set up. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It should only take a few minutes. And other than that, any word of mouth, any kind of verbal support, social media, passing links around. We have quite a few links. We've done a few interviews on the internet. We've done interviews in print media. We have several websites. We also have 4 videos right now. They're all trailers. They're all pre-production trailers. So there's a lot of information out there about this particular project.
I'm certainly excited about it and want everyone out there who I'm certainly excited about it.
The reason I'm so determined to make this film about the war brides is because these women went through so much. Like my mother, they endured the war. A lot of them were very young. Some were even children at the time. And then to be occupied by the U.S., that was another very different experience for them because Japan has always had a closed-door policy for a long time, so there are very few foreigners in Japan. But once they learned that the U.S. military was not there to be hostile towards the civilians, they opened up to them, and that's why they were able to date them and marry them. But these women endured that. They endured coming to a country that they'd never been to before, and in those days, you were on a boat. You would ride a boat for a couple of weeks and land in the U.S., and for the women who were able to go to military bases with their husbands and their children, they were okay because they were around other war brides, not just Japanese, but sometimes there were German, French, Belgian. There were other European war brides. But the ones who went to their husband's hometown that were not on military bases but in civilian areas, they suffered from a lot of things, from isolation. Imagine speaking very little English at that time, which most of the war brides were not fluent in English, and then finding yourself in a different country with different people, not having access to your own culture, your own language, your own rituals, because it's not practiced in this new place where you are. And another thing, Japanese war brides were primarily in mixed-race marriages because at the time the U.S. military was segregated, and it was either black military, Caucasian, white military. There were some OSI, Japanese American officers, but I've only heard about 2 stories where that occurred, and because the work was of such a secretive nature, I don't have anybody interviewed who was in that kind of a relationship. I do have one woman whose father was Mexican-American, and that was rare as well. But in these mixed-race marriages, these women knew they could not stay in Japan. If they had already had kids with their husbands, they couldn't stay in Japan and raise those children. They would be completely ostracized and rejected by the Japanese. So they felt also that it would be better to raise the kids in the U.S., but as I said, if they weren't on the military bases and they were in areas that were predominantly one particular race, they also experienced hostility, especially since at that time there was a lot of anti-Japanese hysteria due to the war. Due to Japan starting the war, people in the U.S. really disliked Japanese people, period. Even the naive war brides that were so harmless were accused of being spies or traitors. And also during that time period, we're talking about interracial marriages being illegal in 16 states up until 1967, and Loving versus the state of Virginia, which went to the Supreme Court and overturned some of these state laws that proclaimed that any white person could not marry anybody else who was not white. So a lot of these war brides just had no idea what they were walking into.
Well, Yayoi, this is a very important part of history, a lot of lesser-known information that the public will come to know through your film documentary presentation, Yayoi. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. We want for folks to support this project in any way that they can. Go to War Brides of Japan. And again, Yayoi, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Arigatou gozaimashita, Roberto-san.
Indeed, Yayoi, I will brush up on my Japanese. Thank you for the pleasantries. There it is, folks. Yayoi, Lena Winfrey, writer, director, producer, War Brides of Japan. Go to War Brides of Japan.